It appears that AEW has some major plans for their World Women's Champion. And this is actually great news if you've been watching AEW, because I think a lot of the conversation on social media has been that AEW hasn't necessarily made Thunder Rosa feel that important to the show. Especially when everybody has seen how Britt Baker has been booked, or now Toni Storm. It just seems like there's other storylines that take precedence over the World Women's Championship, which is very strange because when Britt Baker was the champion, it was very clear that AEW put her first and foremost. But this belt, to a lot of people, feels secondary, which is really strange considering how great Thunder Rosa is. And especially when you look at Jade Cargill and what she's doing with the TBS championship, I think there's a lot of people who kind of realize at this point, like, you have two great championships being held by two great people, but one of them, which is the main title, doesn't feel like the main title. And that's pretty much the argument, right? Now, it appears that AEW actually has some major plans for Thunder Rosa, which this is great news if you like AEW. This is great news if you like pro wrestling in general, because more of this, I think, is exciting for AEW. Let me explain. So for those who don't know, AEW announced they announced one match, right? There's been one match that's been announced. And then there's another match that was a challenge that is expected to happen as well. And both of these matches aren't going to take place in AEW. So the reason why I say this is a good thing is because these plans that are here can take place in other companies. And that's exactly what's happening here. So Thunder Rosa is set to return to Japan for Tokyo Joshi Pro Wrestling next month against Miyu Yamashita. And this is taking place at the Summer Sun Princess 2022 event. Now, Thunder Rosa is going to go there with the AEW World Women's Championship belt and represent AEW at Tokyo Joshi Pro Wrestling. So with TJPW having an AEW wrestler there, this is great because so far when we have seen the Forbidden Door stuff, for the most part, we haven't seen AEW export their talent to other companies as much as we'd hope. And with AEW having such a hard time getting so many people on their TV programming, this is a good way to have your champions defend the belt and bring the belt to other companies. We've seen Joshi wrestlers come to AEW. We've seen W. Morrissey come to AEW. We saw John Morrison come to AEW. We've seen some things with the Forbidden Door happen on AEW. But for the most part, AEW doesn't really send their talent elsewhere. Yes, we see them from time to time go to AAA like Matt Hardy just did. But for the most part, most AEW talent has been either confined to AEW or indie programming. So Thunder Rosa is going to go represent AEW at Tokyo Joshi Pro Wrestling. Now, this is good news for AEW. The second match we'll talk about in just a moment. But the reason why I specifically want to talk about this is because, one, that shows that the relationship with TJPW is strong, which is fantastic. But also, the AEW women's division, it's like they don't have bad wrestlers, but they just don't have enough time. They're not given enough time. There's not a lot of things happening within this women division that makes it stand out, unfortunately. And between Jade Cargill and Britt Baker and all of these different things, you should want your world champion to be a world champion. And I think the greatest thing that you can have as a world champion is to have your world champion show up in other companies as well and defend that belt and represent your company. Because that's really what it is about, for me at least. That's one of the reasons why I think I took a strong liking to Kenny Omega going to Impact. When Kenny went to Impact, it was nice to see the AEW World Championship belt on a smaller programming. And not only did it help Impact, but it was just cool to see something different. For Thunder Rosa, she is somebody who I think is really great, but she hasn't really been given an opportunity to shine. And if I am AEW, what I would do is really, really make a big deal out of this specific match, especially because Tokyo Joshi Pro Wrestling has involvement with AEW with wrestlers coming back and forth. Now, with that being said, what was really cool was last night at Triple Mania in Tijuana, Mexico, we got a challenge from Taya Valkyrie. And for a while, we were all wondering what was going to happen with Taya Valkyrie. Will she go to AEW? So, of course, this became a really cool thing because with Taya Valkyrie, she actually challenged Thunder Rosa. Now, we don't know what is happening here because at the Forbidden Door pay-per-view, it is going to be Thunder Rosa versus Toni Storm for the championship belt, for the AEW World Women's Championship belt. Now, the thing is, it's within the promotion. It's not it's kind of like a weird situation, right? Because New Japan doesn't have female talent. Instead of having somebody from Tokyo Joshi Pro Wrestling maybe compete against Thunder Rosa at Forbidden Door, it's literally AEW versus AEW in that match. This is why I've been so keen on making sure that Forbidden Door is more than just AEW and New Japan, because Taya Valkyrie challenging Thunder Rosa is great, not only for AAA and AEW, but it's great for wrestling fans because, again, it just goes to show you that the Forbidden Door concept and working with other companies, it's not a relatively new concept, but the way that it's handled is a really good thing for fans. Taya Valkyrie versus Thunder Rosa will be a banger of a match, and also Thunder Rosa went to Instagram and actually accepted this match challenge. So AEW has major plans here for Thunder Rosa, obviously putting her in these big matches, but it doesn't appear that any of these matches will take place on AEW. I do prefer them to take place on AEW, but what I would do for AEW to make these matches seem important, instead of having Thunder Rosa versus Taya Valkyrie on AEW Dynamite or Thunder Rosa versus Miyu Yamashita, what I would do is actually have Thunder Rosa actually compete on a weekly basis to build up to these matches. I would create a storyline within these matches, because if AEW treats them as a big deal, it will make Thunder Rosa look like a big deal. So if Thunder Rosa's versing, Red Velvet or, Chris Statlander or Hikaru Shida or whatever, maybe Nyla Rose, right, on Dynamite, and just picking up wins, and she's cutting promos, building to her match against Miyu Yamashita or Taya Valkyrie, like, that's going to make people feel good about the situation. It's going to make people feel like she's important to the show. And I also think Taya Valkyrie versus Thunder Rosa, it's just a no-brainer. I'm assuming it's going to take place at another AAA event, which again strengthens the relationship between AAA and AEW. Obviously, for those who don't know, Jeff Hardy was pulled from Triple Mania, and he was replaced by Johnny Hardy, aka John Morrison. This dude's got a million names. He did the whole Jeff Hardy shtick, and then eventually he turned. But it was cool. It was a really nice thing, and this is kind of like, WWE doesn't have these relationships with other companies. AEW does. It's one of the things that is appealing to AEW. But I think if you create stories within these matches, you can do a great job. And if you're AEW and you're creating stories for matches that take place outside of your product, when you bring those talent from outside the company into your company, people will be a little bit more familiarized with them. Maybe they'll get a bigger pop. Maybe they'll even get more coverage through the media, whatever it may be. I think it strengthens the Forbidden Door concept. Let me know what you guys think. Obviously, some major plans for AEW. We'll talk more about it as we get more information. I appreciate you guys for watching. Peace.